for people to go back to, and the economic dislocation that India suffered will actually be mitigated to a very large extent. So this is quarantine 2.0 that we are going to be entering. So I would like to kickstart this entire panel by a round of introductions by esteemed panelists. So we'll start off with Visa from Tata Healthcare Fund. Visa.
Yeah, thanks, Siddharth, and thanks for inviting me on this panel. My name is Visa Lakshmi Chandramali. I'm the founding partner at Tata Capital Healthcare Fund. We are an India-dedicated healthcare and life sciences private equity fund. We are largely focused on early growth and mid-growth investing. At the present juncture, we are investing from our fund too. So that's about it.
Perfect. So one more request to all the panelists, since the Honorable Finance Minister is going to be announcing her initiatives, and we also have the voice and face of Invest India with us. So we could actually ask one ask from your fund or from your sector to the Finance Minister, and then we can actually pick Deepak's brains as to how we need to temper our expectations when the announcement's also made. So,
sure.
Lisa?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if we have to have one ask from the government, especially in light of this COVID crisis, I think the most important thing is to set out some kind of a research policy specifically to address communicable diseases and for pandemics like this. And more importantly, have a budget and provide funds in mainly the form of grants or in the form of soft loans or whatever, so that some kind of an ecosystem dedicated in a focused manner can come about in the next few years. More importantly, there should also be some kind of a mechanism for follow through and implementation, I think. So that's the ask from our end.
Thanks a lot, Visa. Sandeep, over to you.
I'm Sandeep Singhal. I'm a co-founder with Nexus Venture Partners. We are a cross-border technology and consumer fund investing both in the US and India markets. In India, we've invested across a slew of industries, including education, e-commerce, healthcare, but all sort of technology-enabled businesses. We are, currently working very closely with our portfolio companies as they navigate through this, change environment. We have investments in financial services, NBFCs, and so on as well. We're seeing the impact of RBI guidelines on that. We're seeing impact of, we also are in logistics, so we are seeing the impact of the MHA guidelines on, movement and so on our portfolio companies. So it's a range of impacts across our portfolio and working closely with them. If there's one thing that I would like to sort of see from the finance minister, it's really a back-to-back support on the guideline that MHA put out, or even the Prime Minister put out, was ensuring that employees remain on the rolls. And if you look at what the US has done with the PPP program, we'd like to see something equivalent in India, where the government is helping, at least in the short term, in the lockdown period, startups cover some of the payroll costs.
Thanks a lot, Sandeep. Karan, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Sat. And thanks again to IVCA for setting this up. So I'm a partner at Shirate Ventures. We're also a early stage venture fund focused on technology, tech-enabled startups. We've been investing since 2007, invested in about 90 companies. And our, similar to what Sandeep said, our range of portfolio companies spans consumer tech, healthcare, fintech, and a lot of time I think right now is being spent with companies in normalizing the effect of the lockdown on business, on employees, on all the stakeholders. And I think that's where I think a lot of people are waiting for clarity to emerge in different places. I think I echo what Sandeep mentioned. I think maybe specifically on financial services, it would be very good to get more clarity from the RBI on the moratorium for NBFCs, because a lot of companies, whether they're in fintech or otherwise, are going through a period of situation where they're not being able to correctly deal and assess the risk. And I think that creates a lot of medium and longer term impact. I also think what the government's there has obviously been some initiative, for instance, what Siddi's come out with on loans for SME companies, startups, obviously, but I think a slightly more broader package to help not just funded companies, but also companies which are bootstrapped and run. I think that support will be important beyond the employee payroll cover. I think that little bit of clarity, because the SMEs will form the base of growth over the next 12 to 18 months, whatever that is. I think clarity and some more measures on that will be helpful.
So thanks, Karan. So I'll just briefly introduce myself as well. I'm Siddharth Pai. I'm the founding partner of 314 Capital. We're an early stage venture capital fund based in Bangalore with an AUM of just north of about 100 million. We do invest into 5 broad areas: direct to consumer, media and content, fintech, enterprise automation, and lastly to fundamental research. Although that isn't a very VC friendly area, I think this particular crisis has proven the fact that fundamental research deserves our dollars as well as a voice, because in case there is some grand economic dislocation or force majeure event across the world, it's going to be fundamental research that's actually going to save us. Along with this, my primary ask from the government is to ensure that, given the fact that Indian summers are particularly harsh on liquidity as well, we hopefully that businesses won't have to suffer this, and we would see some amount of liquidity measures that actually come in as of now, because it's crucial. Otherwise, close to 25% the entire startup ecosystem and the SME base will be severely or permanently dislocated by this particular coronavirus and the lockdown associated with that as well. So I think Deepak dropped off for some reason. I think he must have some technical issues from his side. So we'd love to actually get an introduction to Deepak. We'd love to actually hear his voice and hear what he would like to say. So the moment he actually pops back into the screen, we'll actually move on to that. So I think to proceed with the entire panel now, it's important before we actually look forward to what happens to actually look back on the decade that's passed. Venture has seen an unprecedented bull run since 2009, since 2009, 2010, all the way to late 2019, early 2020 as well. In fact, that was one of the dream runs for VC across the entire world. So I'd like to ask all my panelists, since we have a very diverse panel set, what were the trends that you actually saw emerge in the 2010s? And how do you believe that COVID-19 is actually going to impact the trends that will actually emerge in the 2020s? Because right at the very onset, given the fact that we are actually faced by this particular crisis, some of the trends that we would have seen emerge in the 2020s are actually going to change significantly. Like the sharing economy was supposed to become large, but it's in the sharing economy pare down significantly as well. And the attention is more towards the individual needs and actually social distancing. So I think we'll start off with Sandeep on this particular point.
Broadly, Siddharth, if I look at it, there are two trends that we have seen in the economy. One is clearly, and I include sharing economy in that, but it's sort of this technology-enabled service delivery is becoming sort of one of the drivers of growth in the country. So whether it is the enterprise or whether it's the startup, everybody is now deploying technology very aggressively in their delivery platforms. So HDFC Bank, the amount of work that you can now do on mobile banking is totally different, right? So you have everything from there to a Paytm coming in and changing the way payments are done, and subsequently what you described as the gig economy getting built, right? So now when payment costs went down, you had an ability to make micro payments, small payments, and that allowed the Olas and the Ubers and all to sort of to scale. So one is this whole sort of technology enabling a new level of service delivery, and that sort of resulting in the shared economy and the gig economy. And in the Indian context, that's very important, because fundamentally we are a country of small entrepreneurs. And we're just naturally built to sort of support a gig economy. And so if you think about where the trends were headed, more and more of the traditional economy was starting to deploy technology in a slow form. The second thing we're seeing is because we do cross-border investing, we were seeing a significant sort of confidence level in the Indian entrepreneur targeting global markets. So you've always had very smart people in India, but they were typically working for large corporations and working in the offshore development centers, the ODCs, or working for Infosys or Wipro and so on, and basically building products for others. And I think the big shift that we have seen in the last in the tens is people are now in the whole sort of global ecosystem. They're integrated into the global ecosystem, and they feel confident enough to go build products for that global ecosystem sitting in India. And so all of a sudden, in that technology product market and so on, and I would say that actually I would take technology away. Just in any product market today, we are starting to see large companies that are thinking from day one about a global market and not just about an India market. And so the ability to build large companies out of India suddenly takes a very different dimension when you're working in a larger market. So I think those are two key trends for us that sort of define where we are seeing the market head. I think the trends, COVID will actually in some ways accelerate the first trend, right? So technology enabled businesses, I think, will see even more adoption in this market as people prefer to do things remotely rather than sort of, I think the human to human interaction will suffer in this period. And so there is already, we're seeing this, we have a grocery delivery company that works with supermarkets in Bangalore. And one supermarket has literally said, during this period, we'll only take online orders. We'll deliver. So there's a fundamental sort of mindset. We could never have expected that. On the other side, where we are working with startups that are looking at global markets, global trade will suffer. On the physical side, we'll see some challenges with supply chains and so on, and people wanting to build supply chains that are more local than before. But in the software space, I don't see any major impact happening. There will be a short-term dip this year on demand as companies try and figure out what the impact on their P&L will be. But I think more broadly, they are looking at long-term trends and saying, okay, in the long term, technology continues to reduce costs of delivery. It sort of allows better customer interaction and so on. So tech deployment will continue to happen aggressively.
Perfect. Thanks a lot for that, Sandeep. Karan, over to you.
So if I look at the last 10 years, and I think the first big secular wave that happened, and maybe I'll take consumer and enterprise separately. I think on the consumer side, we saw the first wave of digital adoption actually happen in a meaningful manner, and that was obviously led and introduced by various e-commerce companies. That obviously created the beginning of the seismic shift on how retail started to become more and more organized. And the two things which are holding back commerce, which is largely around payments and infrastructure, sort of got built by the incumbents as opposed to how it's happened in every other economy. So I think those things took their own time to get built out. What that created was the first set of 30, 40, 50 million users over the last 8-9 years, which is now probably closer to 100 million. And those, I think that group is the one that is digital first. And that's created many more opportunities like ride hailing, like the shared economy. And then what we're seeing now in terms of the full stack models across services and products, where everything from discovery to fulfillment happens on one platform. So you're not sort of handing off from one to the other. And that was always bound to happen because in India, you needed to be able to control everything, every part of the chain for the consumer, because there were many drop-off points. So I think that led to at the point when you sort of proliferated, and that's brought in another 200-300 million people online, and most of those people have been digital citizens now for at least a couple of years. And this will, I think what we're going through now will just accelerate the process of, we've talked about the next NBU, right? The next billion users, of which India will probably be the largest contributor. That whole thing will accelerate. And what we've seen in the last 2, 3, 4 weeks is, it's really like a social experiment of sorts, right? For consumers and people like us who are working from home, but we're also digital first. How our entire lives around work, around personal fronts have changed, right? So it's likely to lead to a lot of adoption of things which we may not have done to begin with. So, I mean, the obvious low-hanging fruits are things like, more and more commerce will happen online. And I don't necessarily mean just the e-commerce companies or the big box retailers. I actually think more and more of the SMEs will become much more open to start going online much quicker, and they will need the tools, the frameworks, and the infrastructure to support them. Right? Those generally don't exist in large formats today, in a large way today. Sorry. The second is around slightly more longer term trends, and we're seeing companies which are obviously in gaming, in digital health. I think the proliferation they've seen in the past 2, 3, 4 weeks has been nothing short of amazing. Only because, you expected, everybody expected revenues to at least stay flat, maybe not go down, because the demand would still be there. But we're actually seeing revenue grow, which means there is a huge latency in terms of the customer demand, which is now being met. And maybe it's forced, and maybe there are, it is, as I said, more of a social experiment which is forced upon us. But you can see what's actually at the crux of it. And that, again, is a secular wave, which, even when the lockdown opens up and there's a slow opening up of the economy, I don't think those trends will go in a hurry. Then you go to the enterprise side, as Sandeep said, we've also been long-term investors in the India model going overseas, starting with enterprise and creating products, for global enterprises. I think that nothing that's happened will do anything but to accelerate it. But I think overall, as we've seen with enterprises, right, them using productivity tools, them being able to manage large distributed workforces from remote locations, I think that part will accelerate as well. And just going back to the point around consumer, and Sandeep mentioned as well, which is India was always thought about as a place where entrepreneurs could create enterprise products for global markets. We're actually seeing that happen even for consumer products. And it's much easier creating a digital consumer product for the world from India, because you've got the product and engineering talent now. And we're also starting to see more and more physical product retailers going outside of India. I think those are trends which this situation that we're going through will do nothing but to accelerate. But overall, I think there will be longer term implications of how we as digital users continue to interact with the digital medium. And I don't mean the first 120 million users. I actually mean the next 200-300 million people. The future of work, the future of personal life, and the future of interaction and engagement will change, whether it's in a 18-month or a 36-month period. Right? So those are trends that we're, I think, looking at very, very closely.
Perfect. So I think from the global macro, what is emerging from all our panelists is the fact that the inexorable march of technology will continue, and India will play a far greater role in this, given the innate talent pool that we have, as well as a large market that has finally come online that can access all these services. Visa, you are in, I would say, one of the most hottest sectors right now in terms of healthcare. I think healthcare, this is an unprecedented forefront of healthcare that we actually seen as of now, and our entire healthcare infrastructure being stressed beyond its limits as well. We'd love to actually see what you thought of the 2010s and how this particular virus is going to reshape healthcare investing as we continue to 2020s.
Sure. So Siddharth, I want to talk about, I think, given the fact that we've been investors in 2010 and we are investors today as well, I think it's very clearly, three key trends that emerge. One is from the disease itself as a pattern. We've moved from something like an infection-oriented to a chronic and a lifestyle-oriented disease. So that today, 60% of India's disease burden is because of chronic and lifestyle-oriented. But what has happened is that this pandemic will continue to challenge us with respect to communicable diseases as well. So my sense is that even going forward, we'll continue to have this dual challenge of both acute as well as a chronic kind of this. So this disease pattern is something very, very, I would say, important for this, especially for a country like us. The second, I think, key trend is from a payor perspective. Who is paying for healthcare today? I think that is a very, very important trend, especially in the last 18 months, because there's some very significant moves that have happened on the government side, on the state side, private insurers, etc. So India has always been an out-of-pocket payout market. 10 years back, I would say it would have been probably a 70 or 75% of the of healthcare was being paid out of pocket. Even today, till about 18 months or 24 months back, 65% of healthcare was being paid by you and me. However, in the last 18 months, what has happened is that the impact of state insurance, government insurance, you call it Ayushman Bharat, you call it all the other state-related schemes, etc. We've seen that there has been a very rapid insurance penetration, and it'll be interesting to see, especially in light of these COVID-related pandemics and stuff like that, how this entire insurance and how government plays a key role in terms of taking insurance forward. So I think it will be an interesting thing. The third thing, yes, you talked about investment in infrastructure, etc. I think that's still, we continue to see the same kind of a trend between 10 years back. Even today, healthcare spending as a percentage of GDP continues to be very, very meager. More so public healthcare spending. But I think what has happened in the last 5 years is this entire digital adoption in healthcare. We didn't see that 10 years back. But today, I would say you've seen funding. You've seen more than $2 billion of funding happening in digital-enabled services. And this has gone across e-health, which could be your pharmacy, consulting, diagnostics. It has gone towards AI-enabled models. It has gone towards telemedicine. It has gone towards, let's say, health trackers, the health modules like the CureFit and stuff like that. But you've seen a significant amount of money and investor backing in that. So if you to summarize, it's basically the changing disease pattern, the insurance penetration, as well as the rise of insurance, as well as the adoption of digital is what I would say are the key three things.
Thanks for that, Lisa. This actually is a perfect segue into the next segment that we have, because you spoke about the $2 billion that healthcare managed to raise as of now. In fact, venture capital India especially had its golden year ending 2019, where about $14 billion came in purely into the VC space itself. And there was a surplus amount of capital that was floating across the entire system, and the mood was high. I think that was the pinnacle of the bull run that we've seen. Whereas as 2020 started, and as we actually go deeper and deeper into the year, the amount of liquidity is actually becoming extremely scarce. We're seeing an entire retraction of capital back to all the large pools of capital in the US, Singapore, etc. And India, and it's left up to domestic investors to actually fill in that pool. So as all of us are investors on this call as well, I would love to actually get your thoughts on what the fundraising pattern is actually going to be immediately after COVID, as well as how it's going to evolve over time. We have seen the evolution of the raise and raise model, raise large amounts of capital, as well as burn through all that capital quickly in order to acquire, in order for growth, customer acquisition, etc. And then profitability is something that comes as a natural function of time rather than a function of effort at the very onset. Whereas we've seen, and this was a viable model in a capital surplus world. But as we enter this particular liquidity crunch and enveloping all startups as well as the listed space as well, that particular model is no longer going to be in vogue. So how would your investing patterns how do you believe the investing patterns in VC as well as in the listed markets as well will actually change in the next 18 months, as well as what is the trend, or what is the baggage we are going to carry into the 2020s? Sandeep?
Yes, I think so that the first thing I would say is investments will continue. There shouldn't be any reason for entrepreneurs to be disheartened that will the VCs or the you guys walk away. I think investments will continue. To your point, that will people be more cautious in terms of companies that are burning a lot of cash? Yes and no. I think where there is a clear path to unit economics. So I think the way to think about this is, I think unit economics will play a more important role in decision making today than it did in the past. So, and that unit economics doesn't need to be immediate. It's not like, okay, a company has to be profitable or, to be funded. VCs understand that there are these periods of investment required to build a company. And in those periods of time, unit economics don't work, right? But I think what will change is there'll be a lot more stress testing now that, hey, if you have scaled something, can you get to unit economics, right? I think in the past, there was this approach of growth at any cost. Keep growing, don't worry about profits, they will eventually come. I think that model will now shift to saying, okay, if you reach this level of growth or if you reach this level of scale, is there profit, right? And how is that profit? Where is that profit pool? Where is it going to come from? Are you going to create a new set of profit pools, or is this taking it from somewhere else? So I think there will be a lot more thought put into that than I think there has been in the past. But investments will continue.
Perfect. So, Sandeep, the clarion call that investments will continue and this too shall pass. Karan, would love to actually hear your thoughts on this as well, since you are an early stage investor like the rest of us. The trends are going to be extremely acute in the early stage and actually start tapering out towards the growth stage as well.
So look, I think the first data point is, there is a lot of dry powder that a lot of funds have, who've raised in the last year or so. And that's true for early stage, that's true for growth stage. Later stage, I think there may be some differences than what happened over the last 2-3 years. But definitely the early and growth stage, there's a lot of dry powder. We've seen, even if you look at China over the past month, a few weeks, after a very, very protracted period of 6 to 8 months, there has been a tremendous amount of activity. And whether or not that continues at the same pace or not, don't know. But I think those trends will follow in each country once there is the clarity that emerges. Right? We saw this in 2002, 2003. I was just starting out my career, so I saw that first. And as soon as the clarity emerges, just a vast amounts of liquidity goes into the market. Same thing happened in 2008. Now, this period is a little bit different. So the way liquidity will come back into the market may be a little bit different than prior periods, because the impact on the real world and real economy is actually a lot more acute. But I think not even the longer term, but I think in the medium term, investments will continue. If you look at the profile of where money comes from, right? So direct sources of capital, so pension funds, family offices, endowments. I think because of what's happened on the public market side, which has seen unprecedented volatility, it's not like I think those things will be shorter term focus for direct sources of capital. And we look at pools of capital, which are being managed either through fund of funds or intermediaries, or then into VC and private equity funds. I think obviously that will continue, but there will be a flight to safety. There will be a flight to quality, which there's no change from before. And then that follows into the investment thesis that VC and private equity funds follow, right? So it's the same thought process that permeates down through different layers. And the simple truth of it is, the way all of us are working with portfolio companies and doing stress testing at various levels, the same will apply for new companies. And the level of risk that you'll apply will be probably higher, at least in the short term, right? Again, but if you look at, if I go back to the point I made on the previous question, there are some secular trends which this is just a time shift for, right? It's those things will continue. But even if you look at what SIDBI has done with its loan program, they started out with having criteria for profitability, and I think they understood after a lot of discussion with funds that may not necessarily be the right quality. So they've gone back and changed it to I think profitable or unit economics.
Actually,
yeah, right. And so those kinds of metrics are what every VC and every private equity fund was anyway looking at in 2019. I think that just the spotlight on that will be that much more. And in terms of having sustainable business models, whether it's B2B or B2C, irrespective, I think those will be the key things, right? How much capital is required to get to a profitable end game? It may not happen in the first round, but I think a lot of details which were potentially glossed over last year or in 2018, I think those will come back to the fundamentals of when you start having those conversations.
Thanks a lot, Karan. So I think even the SIDBI CSAS fund, actually IVCA played a very instrumental role in that, in actually sensitizing SIDBI to the fact that these leap measures need to be mitigated. And you can't actually have harsher conditions like profitability and all at the very onset, especially given the economic dislocation that startups have suffered over the past few days. Lisa, over to you. I would love to actually, since you are actually raising your second fund as of now as well, and you got your first close We'd love to actually hear your perspective on how the LPs, et cetera, also reacting to this. And also given the fact that the public markets actually become the barometer or were one of the largest sources of capital for VCs as well. Given the hollowing out of the public markets we've seen, how do you believe the public markets really build that up? And will they actually still be the barometer for VCs and the private markets to keep raising capital as time goes by?
Sure. Yeah. No, first of all, I agree with Sandeep that fundraising will continue, although with a little bit of a delay. And I also agree with Karan that there are some select pools of capital, and which is exactly what, has been our strategy, not the standard capital pool. Having said that, I think the reality is that the tolerance for failure will be even lower. I think that's something which we have to accept. And I think as, if I were an LP doing a diligence, I would definitely inbuild some kind of additional parameters, something like a business continuity parameter, something like a resilience parameter. And anyway, in the last few years, we've seen how climate change has become a very important parameter in any kind of a diligence process, especially with growth capital funds and, the larger funds. So that's now becoming a set norm. So my sense is that as part of, all this will get weaved into this ESG factors for any kind of a business diligence. And I think LPs will see what is the kind of resilience that our portfolio companies have to any kind of outside shocks, like, a pandemic, for instance, etc. So I think we'll probably need to be aware of this reality and then go out there and, position the fund, position the portfolio companies, or at the same time, if you're doing new investments, etc., try and see, how these new investments are, if you were to subject them to a resiliency factor, if you were to subject them to a business continuity factor, how something like that will behave, I guess. I think that will become a new norm in the sense. Right. And to answer your thing about public markets, yes, public markets have, I think, at least not given as great returns compared to private markets. That's what our research shows. And we think, especially, given the fact that we are dedicated healthcare, we feel that healthcare private market has probably given you better returns compared to this. Although in the recent past, healthcare has been a decent outperformer. Our sense is that capital allocation to some of the, the private market space will probably, I think, keeping in mind, obviously, these factors will I'm not able to say whether the trend will go up, etc., but I think that will come under focus.
Perfect. Huh?
So can I just add one thing to what Visa said? So, and it's a very important point, I think. There has been a growing shift in the awareness of sustainable investing, and it's a big black hole. Most people don't know what that means. There are obviously impact funds, but there's a lot of gray area in between mainstream funds like all of ours and impact funds. And so the first one thing which we are seeing for pretty much all direct sources of capital is the move towards more sustainable or more sustainably oriented investing. And it's a lot of fuzzy logic, but I think that in this environment and the next few years, again, will happen more and more so. So ESG, I think, is one certification or qualification that a lot of funds who got capital from development institutions need to go through, have gone through. We've done that certification. And I think that opens the door to, okay, what else is possible? If you look at the different aspects that come under SDG, most mainstream funds actually obviously don't pay attention to that. But definitely in developed economies, there has been a big push towards that in the last 2 or 3 years. We're seeing more and more of that happening even in developing economies, partly because of the push from LPs in those developed economies, but also because of the opportunity set in terms of what's actually there on the ground, and where the focus is. And I think that will be a fairly large opportunity for investing for, I think, every fund which wants to look at that. But the approach will have to change as a mainstream fund. That doesn't mean we all become impact investors, but I think the approach to understanding what it entails, being aware about it, and then having the metrics to be able to report that on a quarterly basis to LPs. I think that will be a new lens, which will again become more and more prevalent over the next few years.
That's actually great, Karan, because I think the ESG lens that everyone's all the LPs and the larger funder funds, etc., actually putting on their investments as well is becoming more prevalent over time. The SDG factor is actually being embedded into the PPMs also to make sure that SDG and ESG becomes the lens through which the people actually evaluate this. Sandeep, as a person who actually runs a cross-border fund that raises LP capital from both the US and India, how do you actually believe that LPs are viewing SDG and ESG when it comes to picking the fund managers, and what is the role of technology that actually play in enabling this?
Yeah, so I think Karan mentioned this requirement for ESG certification. We are starting to see that from LPs as well, and some of this is still early days. I think there is a lot of work to be done in terms of defining how they will sort of track and how will we track at the company level and so on. So I think there is so technology in terms of there's potentially an opportunity for some company to go create a ESG monitoring and reporting mechanism for funds. So maybe if there's any entrepreneurs on this call who are listening, there's the business opportunity. We haven't really seen anything right now.
Oh, that's it.
But I would agree with both Isa and with Karan. I think there is a clear I think everybody's aware that BlackRock has put this as one of their key sort of defining criteria on investing now, right? So as a largest public market fund out there saying that ESG is now fundamental to their investment thesis, I think it's just going to trickle down, and it will get into all the mainstream funds because LPs are demanding it, and there will be specific funds that will get created around ESG. But I think over time, this will have to become just part of the mainstream fund. I don't think there will be independent ESG fund in the long run.
Perfect. So we're actually seeing the evolution of venture capital and investing as well go from a purely profit motive to profit tempered by the larger social good that also comes in. I think now is the perfect time for us to actually segue into the heart of this, which are the micro trends that we are seeing emerging over time. We have seen e-commerce play a very large role in the 2010s itself, but as we actually progress through time, we're actually seeing fintech play a more fundamental role. Fintech, in fact, is actually being one of the largest sector as actually attracted the largest amount of capital over the past 3 years as well. We've actually seen the RBI play a very proactive role when it comes to this. One of the shockers for fintech, I think this is the mind of every fintech investor, is the fact that the MDR was actually taken down to zero on UPI. Thus, there was a severe dislocation that had actually happened to a large number of business models. The loan waiver, the loan moratorium given by the RBI as well was not extended to NBFCs. So the startup NBFCs, especially who don't have their own lines of credit, rely upon larger banks, financial institutions, etc., for the lines of credit, have seen tremendous amount of stress. We have seen the ILFS, the hangover of the ILFS crisis from September 2018 still actually rear its head over time. Yes Bank also went down just before the crisis and the lockdown happened, and Yes Bank was one of the largest patrons of fintech companies in the entire ecosystem. So I'd love to open this up first to Sandeep. How do you see fintech actually evolving over time, and what role do you believe that the regulator is also going to play in this? Because RBI has been a very defensive regulator over time. They are slowly opening up, and now given this particular crisis and the systemic shock that India has actually induced, will we see entirely new models being accelerated, or we go back to a more conservative approach over time as well?
So I think Siddharth, you brought up a very important point around fintech, which is very peculiar, I would say, to the India market. And that has to do with the government playing a significant role in the technology enablement of the financial system. So unlike other markets where independent companies have gone in and created platforms, technology platforms, payment platforms, and so on at scale, and therefore created significant value, in India, the government has taken a very sort of, I would say, strong call. I wouldn't call it a socialist call, but it is a call that financial services need to be provided at very low costs. And the UPI example you gave is the classic example of that. So I look at it as both a positive and a negative, right? In some ways, if you create financial rails which are very, very cheap, there are a lot more other business models that can emerge on it, right? So, what I described, Uber or Ola would not have succeeded in India had Paytm not been successful. And Paytm was not successful if the India, the RBI and the government hadn't sort of allowed wallets to emerge. So I think there is going to be this sort of continuous challenge where as fintechs get into large profit pools, will the government allow the regulation to remain the way it is for them to retain that profit pool, right? So if you're sitting there and you were an investor in Paytm 10 years ago, and you saw that there was an opportunity, that there was a huge market, Visa and Mastercard hadn't really penetrated, and you could go and create a new sort of personal credit model with using wallets, and you went out and did it with the expectation that at some point when you had 200 million people on your platform, you could charge them MDR and you could enable the merchants, and it suddenly goes away, right? So I think that's one concern as an investor I would have in the Indian fintech ecosystem, right? That the and I take that only as one example, right? We've had similar issues on the credit side, right, where you sort of the government for political reasons, and I shouldn't be saying this because it's getting reported, but I think, we've allowed the credit sort of the credit structure to fray to meet the demands of say farmers or to meet the demands of SMEs or whatever else. So what happens is that if I'm running a private business serving SMEs, or if I'm running a private, MFIs, right? So I was, you all of a sudden you have a model that's working. Everybody's benefiting, starting from the person who's taking the loan to the person who's giving the loan to the person who is sort of funding it at the VC level or at the individual even the entrepreneur level, right? And all of a sudden you change the rules of the game midway through that sort of journey. And I think that's where potentially we'll need to request the RBI and the government to define rules that are more long term. And then
no, that's right, Sandeep. I think because for financial investors, for investors into fintech and the financial ecosystem, sustainability is actually one of the most important criteria, especially when it comes to when it comes to regulations and everything as well. The moment we have quick changes in regulation, then all the plans, the best laid plans about mice and men, are actually laid to waste. As a English poet actually said that.
And particularly in the fintech space, I think profit pools get built over time. It's not a very early. These are sort of long stage businesses.
No, that's very true. Karan, since you have made several fintech bets from Charity as well, love to actually get your perspective on this also.
Yeah, so I'll a couple of points. One, I think as you guys both said, the regulator has been generally very proactive, right, in a lot of the sectors, in laying out the framework on the regulatory side and compliance. And I think the move that was done by, obviously was pushed by the government and executed by the RBI on Yes Bank, that was much required, because without that, I think whatever the weakness in the financial system, which was there for the last 12 months before that, would have come crashing down much harder. So I think there have been some good decisions that have been taken. And I think Sandeep touched on some of the demand side points very well. I think on the supply side, before we even get to that, there's a lot of question marks on what's there in the credit system today, right? And that will need some level of cleaning up. It will not happen, and I don't expect it to happen in a hurry. These things are structural imbalances which need to be corrected over a period of time. Those things will require some level of gradual cleaning up. But I think as and when that happens in parallel, what's been built very nicely over the past 4 years, 3-4 years, and it's touched some areas on the supply side also, but I think a lot of more focus has been on the demand side, whether it's users, whether it's businesses. I think on the supply side, obviously the capital availability is there, but I think especially when you look at fintech, where you look at the role that technology has to play in the adoption, we're starting to see now, as of the last maybe 12 months or so, enough companies come up with innovative models, innovative distribution, to be able to cater to the much larger side on the supply side, right? And that is equally as important to build up over a period of time, especially outside of the top 10 cities, right, where there is a fair amount of adoption both on demand and on the supply side. So I think SME adoption of fintech as a core part of their business is very, very early on, right? And those are where I think there will be a ton of opportunities for founders, for investors, and there's clearly a role for the government to play, because you'll have to create a level playing field where the rules of the game are known much early on, as Sandeep said. So I think focusing on that as an opportunity, whether it's actually all sorts of merchants, I think is one big part. The second is around just the whole area of credit assessment, credit viability. There have been attempts to do that on the demand side. Again, it's very difficult because it's such a fragmented market, and also information is completely asymmetrical, right? So how do you actually put a framework together where credit models will actually run in a way to give you justifiably right answers within ranges, at least? As you've seen in all developed economies, you've seen it in China happen for different reasons. I think those are areas which we see as things which need to be built structurally to be able to enable fintech to take the next leap. I think the first leap happened through wallets and independent players. The second leap happened through UPI, and what that sort of proliferated. And the third leg will have to happen from the supply side in a much bigger way. And I think those are some of the opportunities that we see which will need to be addressed.
Thanks, Sakar. Bisa, you actually brought upon the role that insurance actually plays in the healthcare space as well. And we have seen over the past recent years, thanks to IRDAI, the emergence of insurtech startups actually proliferating over time. In fact, a number of them have actually launched a COVID insurance scheme, a COVID insurance plan in consultation with the insurance companies also. So how do you believe that the role fintech is going to play in the healthcare space, and how will it actually affect your fund and investing pattern over time also?
So I think this combination of healthcare and technology is so unique that, you either keep doctor at the center or you keep the patient at the center. I think it's all over. There is some kind of a value addition. And more importantly, I think from a regulation standpoint, especially on the taking into account health tech, we've seen, very swift regulations that have been happening, let's say in the telemedicine side, let's say in the e-pharmacy. In fact, e-pharmacy is today declared as an essential service by the government. Then telemedicine, even the PM came on national channel saying that this has to be the preferred mode of service and stuff like that. So I think combining healthcare and technology is very interesting, and this is the way to go, and that leads the way to building, let's say smart hospitals, let's say, the fintech playing a role in manufacturing in terms of the supply chain network, in terms of distribution, etc. So all over, I guess, it is a win-win, I guess.
Perfect. So Visa, you actually mentioned e-pharmacy, which I think e-pharmacy has been a slightly more controversial topic in India, because as of just a few months ago, there was a huge ruckus saying whether e-pharmacy companies could actually operate, did they have a legal framework under which they could actually operate. This actually moves me to my next trend that we're seeing in terms of consumer codes. I think e-commerce policy has been one of the most effervescent policies that India has actually come up with over time. And we are also seeing a huge retail giant in the making, which is Reliance, is actually going to come into the field. We have seen consolidation in the space after a very brutal e-commerce war. And some of the investors on this call have also seen that particular war from the very battlefield itself, as well from a second vantage point. So I'd love to hear the perspective about Sandeep, of all the panelists, on how the consumer companies and how e-commerce is going to evolve over time. Regulation has been one of the biggest bugbears of this particular sector, as we've seen. But what we're seeing as of now as well is actually the rise of consumer companies. We're seeing a Swadeshi 2.0 movement actually come in, where people are saying, okay, I want to buy global products that have actually been made in India by Indian companies also. So how are we seeing the preferences change? How would regulation actually affect these particular companies, over time? And how would the entry of Reliance into this particular space also play out for everyone? Sandeep, I think we'll start with you.
So it's pretty broad. I think e-commerce has a sort of lot of areas we can sort of dive into. One is clearly maybe taking your point, starting with your last point around Reliance's involvement in this space. I actually think that's an overall positive for the market. We need more and more distribution mechanisms for whether it is product manufacturers or whether it is retailers in the case of marketplaces. So any sort of player that is coming in and investing and bringing consumers on board is valuable to the end supplier, right? So I think Reliance's entry and investing in building the consumer demand is going to be a overall positive thing for the ecosystem that follows. Um, the areas around e-commerce. So that's one, right? Second is we are starting to see e-commerce now penetrate into all aspects of our lives, right? So grocery was probably the last one that it was just taking the longest. It's also, because of it's typically low value, low margin business from that standpoint. And so everybody starts with the high margins. They can give large discounts and they can therefore get the consumer to convert based on discounts. What has happened is this COVID thing has really pushed grocery to the forefront. So today, every single e-commerce company, whether it is Zomato or Swiggy, or whether it is Amazon or Flipkart, everybody is today in the grocery segment. And out of this, you'll see more and more consumers getting comfortable with daily transactions online. And so it's a fundamental shift in terms of people viewing online payments, people viewing deliveries, people viewing, and that will have an impact across the ecosystem, right? So I think it's not just, so anything that is sort of standard products, more and more will now move online. There is, I don't know if you would include education in this category, but I see standard education, a lot of it is going online, and more of that will happen, right? I think Visa mentioned also healthcare, right? So we're seeing, we had funded a company, Librate, was doing tele consults in 6 years ago, and we just could not get patients to participate. We couldn't get doctors to participate. That the first time a doctor would ask a patient to pay online for a teleconsult, and the patient would say, "Sir, but you were doing this free on WhatsApp, or you were doing this free on a call. Why are you charging me now?" Right? And the doctor would freak out and would not continue with the payments, right? They would literally say, "Tell Librate, make it free, otherwise I won't sort of continue doing this." So it's an interesting behavior change, right? So today you have doctors that haven't practiced for the last 1 month. People have just not generated, because you can't do anything that is non-essential, right? So non-COVID related consults are not happening and so on. And doctors are saying, "Hey, I need to continue with my practice. And I can't continue with my practice on WhatsApp and phone because that's free. So I need platforms at a teleconsult, but in such a way that I can charge for it." So there's a behavior shift that's happening, right? Now, will that behavior shift continue? My view is I would still give a 50% chance. Indian patients are still very, very price conscious. They may not agree to it. I don't know, Visa may add to that. But I think so there is a fundamental behavior change from a discount-led approach to a convenience-led model. I've always said that till the Indian consumer switches from a discount-based purchasing behavior to a convenience-based purchasing behavior, we will not see large companies get created. And that's where I see the shift happening in this switch.
Thanks, Visa, I think I'd love to actually get your thoughts on that and exactly what Sandeep mentioned now. The fact that the moment the doctor actually, the role of WhatsApp's actually played in the entire consultation space as well, and the previous reluctance of doctors to adopt technology when it comes to practice, but now all of them are actually moving online. We'd love to actually hear your thoughts, and which are the business models you believe, since you do invest in EBITDA positive models, would actually emerge out of this and can actually go public over time as well.
So clearly, I think the number one is which can benefit from this entire technology is your healthcare services. And within healthcare services, it could be the entire gamut. It could be tertiary, quaternary, it could be single specialty, it could be primary clinics, even government-run public hospitals, etc. And what we are seeing, especially with some of our hospital investments, is we are seeing increasing adoption of technology. See, in the earlier, few years back, it was more in terms of fine-tuning the modules that you have with respect to hospital information system, how to ensure that, right from the time the patient is coming in to the time the patient is discharged, how your turnaround time in terms of the entire process, etc., is fulfilled, etc. Those were the standard parameters like any business. But today, I think the center of the model is the patient. And in terms of capturing the patient across the entire chain, not just in terms of pre-OPD, but at the time of OPD, then at the time of entry till discharge, supposing the patient wants to go in for any kind of consultation, surgery, etc. And then post the patient has been discharged, how to engage with the patient, that entire thing, the doctor wants to have a control about, or the doctor or the hospital management card. So with respect to that, in fact, very recently we were even trying out to see if we can look at a blockchain module for our hospital investment, to try and see how that entire patient engagement, because today what has happened is that you have providers, your technology is enabled to such an extent that you're able to send the doctors, the patient need not come to the hospital so many times as he used to do, reducing that inconvenience factor as well. You can take x-rays at home, you have that ability. There is obviously telemedicine has grown, but still not to the extent that we would like. So all these factors will I think see a sea of change. So that's on the healthcare services side. Then with respect to manufacturing, I think, because since we do the across the board in terms of the entire supply chain, from the time the goods are manufactured till the time it enters the pharmacy stores, there are multiple layers. Those multiple layers are seeing a kind of a disruption, the entire disruption of the distribution channel. So that is something again, which I think will be this. Okay. The third is with respect to diagnostics, with respect to clinical research, all the CDMO companies, contract development, manufacturing companies, etc. In terms of how they are able to do. So this is more like a B2B model where your customers are your other pharma companies or your international pharma companies, where you're doing clinical trial modules for them, you're doing BA studies, etc. for them. So there again, the entire role of technology is becoming a very big factor. So these are some of the key. And then the standard ones are obviously your, the ones which are under discussion are your health tech models, which are AI-led and stuff like that.
Perfect. Thanks, sir. Karan, you actually touched upon the point of SMEs actually transacting online as well, and them actually becoming part of the entire e-commerce chain. So love to add, and you also spoke about how you can build a consumer business in India as well, and the rise of the consumer company. So love to hear your thoughts on the trends emerging in this space over time.
Yeah, sure. I'll probably just give a quick, shout out to some of the e-pharmacy companies, because they've gone from being pariahs 2 months back to being at the forefront of fighting, with the government, with everything. The fact that the Arogya Setu was developed through I think folks from Make My Trip and 1mg, I think just shows how quickly that shift has happened. And I think that there's a lesson in that for everybody, right? These things are seminal in nature. These are not small time shifts which will happen. And I think the just to touch very quickly on what the healthcare industry is doing, because at least I know Sandeep and I are seeing this every day as part of the ACT platform, just the kind of initiative and the kind of work that's being put in by everybody. People who had nothing to do with healthcare are becoming healthcare manufacturers for equipment, for safety, supplies, etc. I think that's just, it's amazing to see how everything is sort of charged up. On specifically on the question, I think Sandeep covered a lot of the points around on the consumer side, and totally agree with a lot of those. What we're seeing is also, how specifically on SMEs and enterprises, if you look at how B2B commerce as a platform play has come of age, right? In the past 2-3 years again, because again, the SMEs are realizing that there is such a fragmented base of, and you can literally do it industry by industry, right? So we have a company in the grocery space, we have Zongo in packaging, there are a whole lot of others in construction, in for motor parts, etc. So I think each industry has its own thing, and that I think has been a very positive development for the overall industry, because it creates again an organizational layer on top of which, SMEs can go procure, can go sell, and not necessarily have to do everything physically, which is what they were doing maybe even 3-4 years back. And again, what we're going through right now will again force a lot of this to become more and more digitized, both on the buying side and on the selling side, right? So the impact that e-commerce has had on consumers is very well known, and it's here and now. It's for us to all see. But I think the impact it's starting to have on businesses, and not just large ones, is something which we'll probably see a lot more in the coming years. And then to your question on how we're seeing, the companies from India going outside, we've got examples. About 14 of our companies on consumer alone have gone outside of India very, very rapidly, and probably only in the last couple of years. I can say that will probably be true for companies, for other funds as well. But it's because people are thinking going internationally early on, and especially where you have a digital platform, not necessarily a physical product, although the physical product sales are also happening outside of India. But especially the digital platforms first, you can permeate everywhere with the same ease that you're permeating in India. And in fact, your customer yield, your average value on the customer side will be probably that much higher. So you're using the same low cost base experiment that the IT services company started 20 years ago. You're being able to do it on the consumer side because your products are good enough, and you know how to service customers in countries outside of India. It's not just a developing market syndrome. So I think those are some, again, very interesting things that we're seeing at a micro level happening in certain sectors.
Perfect. That's good. So I think we have only about, I think, another 10 minutes now in terms of the discussion. That we'll have to move to Q&A. So I'll actually combine the next one with what I call the yin and yang, the attention economy and the sharing economy that actually come up. We've seen the attention economy, we've seen the sharing economy garner huge number of eyeballs over the past few years, but ever since COVID happened and social distancing has become the norm, they have actually fallen a little out of favor as of now. But the attention economy, especially in terms of media content, have actually seen their metrics rise to the entire roof, in fact. So how do you believe the interplay between the attention economy and the sharing economy would actually play out over time? It's a combination of media, it's a combination of micromobility, it's a combination of your co-living, shared working spaces, etc. Karan, would love to hear your thoughts on this first.
Sure. And again, if you look at, I think China is probably the only country which has come out of it in a slightly more advanced manner. And there'll be some differences in how Indian consumers behave. But the attention economy was here before, has got accentuated now, will continue to be there going forward. If you look at the sharing economy, there are certain services, there are certain platforms which will be essential for the economy to function for users. May not be deemed essential services in terms of what's allowed during the lockdown, but I'd be shocked if once the lockdown is actually lifted on May 3rd, or even if it goes beyond that, if users don't come back in big droves. Shared accommodation may take a little bit longer because you have so many more elements to be able to take care of, right? Just two sort of examples on that. But I think overall, the juxtaposition between the sharing economy and the attention economy will continue. You'll probably see a lot more collaboration happening between the two, because when you're engaging with one kind, whichever it is, you're generally using the other kind as well, right? Or you're in that environment, in that surrounding. And I think let's not forget, a large part of this is taken up by people in sort of the 20 to 35 age group, where the cost of ownership of, especially on the shared economy, is still going to be high. And if we're coming into a period of, even if it's not economic contraction, but if there is a leveling off of growth for the next few quarters at least, I think people will be wary about creating an asset base for themselves and taking on the liability. So longer term, it may be a bit different depending on how the financial system plays out. But I think for the next few years, we think there'll be a very, very big overlap between the two sets that you mentioned.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Sandeep, would love to hear your thoughts in the attention economy, since you are an investor both in the attention economy and the sharing economy as well, especially when it comes to micromobility.
Yeah, so I think to the points that Karan made, and the point I made earlier is the user is seeing more and more convenience from both sides, right? So on the attention side, the ability to read the newspaper online today, it's still there, right? So you're not getting the newspaper delivered at home, but everybody wants to know what's going on. So there is a lot more traffic that is now coming online for that. Even in rural markets, people are looking at their phones as the means to get content, right? So I think that's clearly a trend. Again, I think my view is that once a consumer is exposed to a certain value that they haven't seen in the past, you know, and the longer this lockdown continues, the more that behavior is reinforced. So in some ways, the attention economy guys are probably, you know, better off the longer the lockdown is. but but it's you know there's a spike right now. We are seeing that spike in our companies that are focused on that market, but we expect that that spike will go down, but we will see many people who have come on for the first time stay on beyond this. On the shared economy, in the short term, obviously big impact right now, given the guidelines and from MHA and so on. But as Karan mentioned, I think they are in effect essential, because many of the things, particularly around micro mobility that we are providing, are almost requirements today in the market. And we're seeing we're seeing the pickup in these markets, both from a employee standpoint. So the employees, the gig economy workers who are providing the micro mobility services, for them this is actually a very decent wage mechanism, right? So you're seeing this not as somebody just doing this on the side, but they're actually seeing it as a proper sort of career kind of thing. People are doing this on a full-time basis, and for that reason we will see more and more of that emerge as a credible career and a profession. And the second is that I think, given our infrastructure that we currently have, this is the private way of creating infrastructure. And so we will create more and more, of the replacement of infrastructure will happen through these micromobility platforms.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. So, Visa, I would like to actually touch upon this a large trend we're actually seeing as of now. It's in terms of fundamental research. What COVID-19 has especially taught us is the fact that we haven't put enough investment money, VC money, private equity money behind fundamental research as well, and the effects of that are actually showing on the world as of now. Do you believe that COVID-19 is actually going to fundamentally change the way that investors actually think about investments into fundamental research companies? I mean, they actually start carving out longer duration funds so that they can actually, these companies can go from research and development to gestation to commercialization as well within the time frame of a typical PE or a VC fund.
No, I think this is an excellent question, and it's a need of the hour, clearly. But given the light of the COVID legacy, I would say, more than investors, I think every country should actually now prepare to become self-efficient in finding some or the other solution against a possible similar kind of a crisis. More so in a country like India, because we are a hotbed of communicable diseases, given sanitation, given awareness, given education, given low access to healthcare facilities, etc. So my sense is that, yes, investors will come in at probably more at a later date, but I think primarily it has to be, the governments either on their own or through a collaboration means, sort of finding some way to do fundamental research in communicable diseases, so that they can foresee, what are the mutations that are likely to come going forward, because only if you do fundamental research, you will be able to figure that out. And how do you prepare? And number two, how do you prepare for these kind of mutations? And what are the solutions in terms of, and clearly the solutions are three, and I'm talking from an healthcare, that, other sectors that are more, it could be diagnostics, it could be vaccines, it could be therapeutics, those kind of furthers. So it has to be institutions and governments that come out and put out this kind of a COVID-19, legacy related issues. And which is why I said that my primary ask would be to put out a policy or specifically on communicable diseases. And we need to build a distinct research model because India has this distinct advantage of both chemistry as well as technology, right? So we need to use that advantage to the fullest. And one such model could be: is there a way in which, unlike the Western style, where we are doing, it takes about 10 years from idea towards, let's say, actually entering phase 4 clinical trials, can you condense that to 3 or 4 years? One such model could be maybe a drug repurposing model, maybe something what China has done in terms of, there is a very active traditional medicines ecosystem in China. Maybe do you want to look at promoting and regulating some of that kind of research, or drug repurposing model, etc. So these are some aspects which I think this. But from an investor standpoint, I think investors are very, very returns focused. So my sense is that it's unlikely to be investors who will focus on fundamental research, but it has to be government and institutions.
Thanks, Avisa. So I think I'd love to open this question both to Sandeep and Karan as well. The role that investors actually play in the fundamental research ecosystem, when is the right time for them to come in? Will they ever emerge a set of funds who actually come in towards the research phase itself, or will funds continue to come in closer to the commercialization phase? And another question specifically to both of you: would you actually see fundamental research and biotechnology become a larger part of your portfolio, of your subsequent funds as well over time? So Sandeep, you can start.
Yeah. So if you look at sort of developed economies and the way research is funded, as well as commercialized going forward, there are very clear sort of models that exist. So let's start with the funding part. Apart from university or sort of research institution funding, there's a lot of corporate funding that is going into research. In particular, sort of in professors getting grants from either corporates or NIH and other places to do research that is geared towards solving particular problems. And what that does is, when that research is finally sort of done and gets to an answer, most universities also have very strong commercialization licensing departments and so on. So they're looking at all the research that's happening in the university and trying to analyze which of these would fit in the commercial space. And there is a central point where you can come and say, hey, here's some interesting research I can look at, and I'll license it for this particular purpose. Or somebody will say, okay, I'll leave the university, give the university a certain amount of equity or whatever else, and I'll commercialize it, right? So professors go out and become entrepreneurs. It's still early days in India. I think that's one of the challenges that we see as a fund. We have done a few companies. So 10 years back, I'd invested in a company called Sedimac, which is started by an IIT professor, which was effectively research that was coming out of his lab. So it was him and a master's student and a PhD student, three of them who sort of got together and built this next generation engine control technologies that we funded. So I think there is room to do more of that in India. But we also need to, in that context, get our researchers more plugged into global research platforms, so that when the research that comes out is actually ready for commercialization, it is not just in an India context, but it's in a global context. And that's one of the the areas where Indian industry is globally competitive. I think there is opportunity to do research-based funding. So today, I know, for example, once in a while we'll go and look at stuff that UDCT is doing, right? Because the chemical industry, there's a lot of stuff that's happened, and India is globally competitive. So once in a while we'll go and look at stuff there. But I think that BIRAC is doing stuff, and and so on. So there is stuff happening in pockets, which is in that sort of workflow today, but more of that can happen for research to get funded.
That's it. Thanks for that. Karan, your thoughts?
No, I totally agree with what Sandeep's saying. I think the difference that we're seeing now is the research that a lot of the institutes are doing. I think their ability to think around commercialization, and not all of, I think this is true for a few of a very select few institutes that are thinking around how to help with commercialization, even in small respects, either through licensing or through a partnership with corporates. And because we also we do raise money from India, largely from family offices who got businesses. I think we've started using or leveraging that as a resource to help with the commercialization wherever it's relevant, wherever it's applicable, right? So we're seeing small offshoots of that actually happening only in the last 6 to 9 months. I think that will become a small but a growing part of our portfolio focus. It's small in terms of absolute number of rupees or dollars invested, but in terms of the number of companies, it will probably be 5, 6 or so. And I think that's a good base to try and build off. As Anish, I think what Barak is doing, what CCAMP is doing in Bangalore, those are the kinds of institutes which will help create the bridge. I think that's where the issue is, right? It's not about funding at a later stage or where sector specific or theme specific funds can come in and take it up. It's really this bridge between research and the first level of where commercialization can happen, not just in healthcare, but in core engineering, in material sciences, in things like nanotechnology, etc., right? Which are all emerging at more or less the same time. And I must say, in what we've seen in a short period of time recently, the work that the institutes are doing has always been of high quality. I think the bridge that they're trying to create, at least some of them, I think that's been the first part of what will hopefully be a game changer. And then I think funds will have to come in and play their part, right, at different stages.
Thanks a lot. So thanks. So thank you everyone for this. Just before we move into the Q&A part, I'd just like to summarize what everyone said so far. So I think what's happened is venture has had a great bull run, but just because COVID-19 has happened, we are not going to see a sudden disruption of the investing space. A large number of funds are sitting on dry powder, and cash, as to quote Ray Dalio, cash is trash. It does actually burn a hole in your pocket. So all the investors will start investing over time. Profitability will be another criterion. Positive unit economics is something that all investors look at more diligently as time goes by. India has also become a powerhouse now in terms of creating technology and going global, and COVID actually becomes a great way of actually doing that. Our core strength lies into technology and actually selling that as well. That's something that they can work with investors over time. In terms of the trends, the sword of Damocles of regulation is still something that actually hangs over all the heads of all the entrepreneurs and investors. But we have seen models like e-pharmacy go from being pariahs, as Karan called it, to actually becoming the darlings and becoming one of the saviors and champions to emerge out of the COVID-19 situation as well. So, and in healthcare also, we are going to see a large amount of money actually coming into fundamental research, but it has to be government-led with the private participation. Venture capital funds would be more than happy to come in during the stage of commercialization as well as we go about. So we just move quickly to Q&A. I'll leave the questions open to everyone on the panel. Anyone who feels free to like to answer it, feel free to jump in. The first one is from Mehak Malik. What are you hoping to see in education/testing learning, given that 91% of students across the world are not going to school now? There's a clear need to bring mainstream learning online. So this is also tempered with the fact that in the recent budget, the Honorable Finance Minister also announced that online education and e-education is going to be put on par with going to a school as well, and all the education institutions are encouraged to actually start creating courses. So open to all the panelists on this particular question.
So, we are investors in 2 platforms, actually 3 platforms. One is a vocational training platform, so I didn't think of it right away, which is Talent Sprint, but 2 others are actually working with students across a range of age groups. So one is Unacademy, and the second one is White Hat Junior, which is providing coding and creativity. And so, our view is that so far online education had really been considered as a supplemental education. So it doesn't replace schooling, doesn't replace college. It is in the vocational space, it has sort of started becoming more mainstream and not necessarily requiring offline presence, but so there is sort of this supplemental element to it, which I think at least in the near term will remain the case. And but at the same time, what we are seeing is where there is access is an issue, there is an opportunity to build more and more of an online solution rather than offline solution, right? Where there is either not a critical mass of students. How do you create infrastructure for them, and so on. So the online model, like for example, what we're seeing with Unacademy is it's not just ads, right? You see the ads on TV, so it's not just ads, it's actually happening in real life, that people are using it for primary learning, not just for supplemental learning. And we expect that as more of that will happen, we'll start seeing more and more curriculum getting created which is purely online. But at this point, online doesn't really replace. There's a very significant component of education which has to do with interaction with other people. And as we all sit locked down in our homes, we realize the value of interaction.
Yeah.
So I think that will continue.
Perfect. Karan, your thoughts?
Yeah, no. I mean, could not agree more with Sandeep. We've invested in a few ed tech companies in the past, and both were pre. Again, I think Geo has had a huge role to play, inadvertently at least. Both were pre-Geo days. I think the way education has changed online, using the digital platform in the last 2-3 years has been nothing sort of again being a fundamental and a structural shift. For a bunch of reasons. One, as Sandeep said, it's become in some cases more as a primary source as opposed to a supplemental source. So the quality of education, the delivery of education, the content that you're getting is as good with what you would get in a physical environment, in some cases better, right? That's one. I think the second is more and more of the users are, and especially, and I think this is where companies like Byju's and Topper have played a leading role, have made users more comfortable with the digital environment. The people who were making the decision to pay for an online course were generally parents, and parents of previous generations obviously didn't think it was worthy enough of being anywhere close to a primary mode of teaching. I think that's changing more and more. And then some of the companies that Sandeep mentioned, where they're also going into the younger segment, and we've seen how children of between 5 years and above, how quickly they take to digital platforms, and it's very intuitive. I think those are some of the things which will continue to change how edtech is delivered. And obviously payments is something which has been sorted. I think in the only areas where there still is a challenge is where using technology to deliver education is leading to in upliftment in your socioeconomic status, and especially in jobs, etc. I think those are where the payoffs are a lot more immediate. The ROIs are very, very high. From a longer term teaching, where you need from a long term teaching curriculum where you do need interaction, I think it's also the question of having the right platform. Sometimes Zoom does not necessarily allow that to happen in the best way. Zoom is a euphemism for what exists today. It could be XYZ. So a lot of that, I think the platforms themselves need to be developed for that, and that's happening in a slower way. But I think that's the one big barrier which will I think will take it from here to there, which has not necessarily been the case till now.
Perfect, thanks. So we'll actually move on to the next question now, which is from YouTube by a person called Mudit Kumar. Post-COVID, where can we expect healthcare investments happening? Is it A, public health insurance, insurtech, or B, more traditional telemedicine, diagnostics, e-pharmacy, fitness tracker space, etc.? So Bisa, I think we would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. No, I think we discussed this during the panel as well. Clearly, post-COVID, there will be something that brings about the interface of healthcare and technology will clearly be one key driver. But having said that, across the board, if you look at the entire spectrum, apart from just healthcare, take diagnostics, because evidence-based decision making is clearly something which has only gone up. And when I say diagnostics, it's not only the B2C, the Dr. Lals and the Thygocare, etc. It's also the B2B diagnostics, the entire supply chain within diagnostics, people who are providing reagents, people who are providing the equipment, etc. So that again will see a big fillip. Obviously, one needs to take a look at in terms of pricing, etc. Then also from a manufacturing side, especially because and if we are looking at India-centric healthcare investments, given the fact that has been a manufacturing hub. India manufactures about 20% of the global generics in volume terms. So I would say manufacturing will get a significant boost. There will be investor interest. There will be companies who will set up manufacturing units, especially to backward integrate. We are great in formulations on API. We depend a lot on other countries, our neighboring countries. And I think especially and specifically because of the COVID legacy, I think you will see manufacturing on something like an API, the entire intermediates, and even more backward. I think that would be again this. Then also, I think from a distribution standpoint, the entire supply chain, and this is true of every other sector, not just healthcare, because the supply chain is so fragmented. My sense is that you will see some order coming in, be it, cold chain logistics, be it the entire, the back-end distributors, you'll probably see that which has it's a mix of e-commerce plus the brick and mortar model kind of a thing, the entire distribution healthcare. And obviously health tech, which will be the largest fillip, given the fact that you will have e-health models, you will have companies marketing, pharmaceutical companies marketing, using a mix of feet on street, like your medical representatives, and partly through digital marketing channels. Also in terms of research for pharmaceutical companies, or from a branding perspective, they will start using online models, telemedicine in the pharmaceutical services, especially in hospitals, etc. And plus overall health and wellness as a theme, I think we'll see a significant fillip, be it wellness products, be it wellness services, and overall in terms of health and well-being. I think, and that's an interface of between both healthcare and consumer, I guess. So these are all the entire spectrum, I think.
And mental health also is seeing a huge amount of interest actually coming to mental health as well, because actually being quarantined for close to 40 days, starved of human interaction. I think mental health is actually on the top of everyone's minds right now, quite literally at that. So I think I'll actually move on to the last question as of now, which is from Aditya Jadhav. Lots of government institutions such as DRDO have started commercialization of their technology, and a couple of entities have been granted the license as well. But none of them on the radar of the VC industry yet. Are there any hindrance in helping those startups in the commercialization of those technologies? So open to the entire panel with regard to that.
But the question is again, the DRDO is licensing.
So lots of government institutions at DRDO have started commercialization of their technologies, and a couple of grants for the use of these technologies have already gone to commercial entities, but there hasn't been a lot of love from the VCs, and they aren't on the radar of VCs as of now. So what is the reason for that? Because we all know the entire chain in the US is very simple. NASA creates a technology or something, for example, commercializes it, and then actually goes to the entire chain. So they developed that as of now. I think the core of the question is, how can we see India actually develop this entire chain, this translation of research into commercialization and attracting VC capital and scaling it forward over time also?
I had invested in a company a while back, which was supplying to DRDO, and we were supplying technologies to a company called Mistral Systems. And I think again, I haven't come across any company today which has been, which has licensed DRDO technology and is out there raising money. So I can't, in the absence of that, it's very hard to. But I would say that again, from the prior experience with Mistral, one of the challenges is DRDO works in a very sort of contained environment, supplying to the Indian defense establishment, and isn't really integrated with the industrial sort of ecosystem around, right? So if there's technology that's being developed, I think the first step that needs to happen is local industry has to start using it. So if there is a company that is licensing the technology, the first step is to get at least 2 or 3 initial customers on board who will help them sort of take that technology from a defense solution to a industrial solution. And at that point, a VC can enter and say, okay, we'll help you scale this up further. So that step, I don't think is a step that take without a industry.
Got it. So India's yet to see the translation from tactical to practical, but VCs as always are open to these opportunities to actually invest and fund these companies, provided there is a proven market and there is a need for this. Karan, any thoughts on that as well?
So we've seen a few, I think a few ideas, not necessarily from DRDO, but again from some of the research institutes which would be developing similar technologies to what DRDO could be developing. In what I mean is in the same line of what DRDO is developing. Again, the big bridge that needs to be built is these technologies can be used for commercialization, but a lot of the use cases are not obvious yet. Number one. Number two, the time taken for it to get into commercialization is something which is still being figured out, right? Those things are a little bit of unknown. And the other thing is, generally from what I've seen, and this could just be the subset that maybe we've been exposed to, the capital outlay in the upfront at the time, the capital you need upfront or in the early part is a little bit, it's a lot higher because there is, capex and other things which need to be done. Now, those may or may not necessarily fit the venture capital form of, the investment framework, right? Because it's a 10-year fund, and I think we do try and mitigate risk with the practical realities of how the business is. So I think that's maybe where some of the mismatches may occur. But again, it's very early days, so it's tough to say that's necessarily going to be the way going forward.
I think the other way to think about this is, interestingly, one research institute that is doing a good job in terms of commercializing its research in recent times in particular is the Indian Institute of Science.
Yep.
It's amazing the number of startup companies we are seeing coming out of that. And I think it's, they've set up this incubation center, and professors and entrepreneurs are working together, which I think is it probably started at IIT, but I think Indian Institute of Science is probably doing a better job from a research commercialization perspective right now. But I think the other aspect, particularly when it goes to the defense sector, is when these technologies are licensed, the government is not committing to any purchase. So you don't have a ingoing sort of base of revenue to say, okay, I'll generate $1 million, $2 million, $5 million, whatever from the government, and then I'll go build stuff elsewhere. If you look at the global markets, in fact, a lot of the licensing that happens with a commitment to purchase from the government.
That's right.
I think India could do more of.
That's right. So I think with this we can actually wrap up. So we are just about reaching the end of a 1.5 hours. We started at 11:10, slightly 10 minutes late. We will be ending at 12:40 as of now. So first, I would like to thank all my panelists for all the efforts and for the time they've actually given us during this particularly stressful time. I think the message that's coming out as of now from all the panelists, from this entire panel, is the fact that India is in a good position to come out of COVID over time. Investors are willing to actually back ideas, and this COVID, when we actually look back at it through the rearview mirror, will actually end up being a blip in the entire scale. The learnings that we'll take from COVID as of now is a need to actually put more into fundamental research, the need to build resilience into models as well, and the need to actually have an ESG and SDG framework through which investors actually operate. So I'd like to thank everyone for this particular part, and just like to end. Deepak unfortunately couldn't be with us because he was called for an important government meeting, but I do hope that he actually heard some of the sessions that all of us had as of now, and this could be translated to policy to ensure that startups and MSMEs can actually come out of this economic dislocation and can actually start going back on the path of sustainability and creating greater economic value for everyone. So this end with saying very famous quote by Abraham Lincoln: "This too shall pass." This particular COVID issue is just going to be a blip in the entire radar as of now, but the learnings from this is something that hold us good and hold us through over time. So thank you to all my panelists, and thank you to all the viewers on YouTube as well as on Zoom. Thank you. And namaskar to everyone.
Just for the record, I'd like to thank everyone, and especially all of the speakers, because I see this particular panel is one which is also very engaged with the overall ecosystem, including IVCA. So I'd like to thank you, all of you, and really amazing insights, a great question set, and a lot of engagement that we've seen on YouTube as well as Zoom. So thank you so much, everyone. To our next week.
And Amit, just one more thing. I think this is something both Sandeep, Karan, and I would like to say. We would actually like anyone who's doing anything to help in terms of mitigating the impact of COVID to apply to the ACT grants. It's an initiative by Indian entrepreneurs, by Indian venture capitalists. IVCA is a part of it as well as all their members, to create 100 crore corpus to give non-dilutive grants to everyone who's actually helping to fight this. All of us are investors, all of us are volunteers. We're working with the entire ecosystem, and we're doing our part to help this happen. So if anyone has an idea, any sort of commercialization, any sort of need for capital to actually mitigate this crisis, please reach out to us. I will actually send the link to this on the comment chat, and Amit can actually share it to everyone as well. We look forward to your participation, look forward to India coming out as more resilient and more resurgent after this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.